Hey, it's Renee from the Craft Table. We are on our last week of the Summer Embroidery Stitch Along. This is week 12, where I talk about prepping your stitched panel in order to incorporate it into other projects. Do not worry if you are still embroidering on your panel. That's perfectly fine. I actually am still working on some of mine as well. The videos will stay up on YouTube indefinitely. You'll be able to access all of them by going to the playlist for the 2025 Summer Embroidery Stitch Along. And while I'm thinking about it, I just want to thank everyone again for joining me on this summer's embroidery stitch along. This is my last full day in Montana. I will be heading back to Florida. I've been fortunate that I can escape the Florida heat during the summer and escape to Montana, which is one of my happy places. The summer embroidery stitch along allows me to feel connected to everyone while I am away from the studio. And I thank you for keeping me company. I'm going to share some examples of projects that I think work well with embroidered fabric. Depending on the project, I will either explain all the steps in the video, or I will link in the description below where you can find a tutorial that's more in depth on how to complete the project. The panel that I was embroidering on this summer includes 4 circular designs spread out with the fabric. Some of you may have chosen to just work on to subdivide your fabric panel and stitch each circle individually. Some of you have decided to keep off the panel as is and embroider the 4 circles as one long piece, depending on what end result that you would like. You may be wanting to just do 4 separate projects, whereas others are wanting to keep the panel as is. And I also know there are different ways that people have backed their fabric panel before they started stitching. You may have opted to just leave it without any type of lining. You may have lined it with just a piece of muslin or, white cotton fabric. I know a couple people had talked about used a fusible stabilizer. As I'm going over the different techniques and projects, just keep in mind that there may be some differences in that, but it should not affect any of the instructions. So regardless of whether you're working on one square or your whole panel, you want to take it out of the hoop and give it a good press to get all of the hoop marks out, off of your fabric. I recommend using a wool mat if you have it, or a plush towel. You want to put your stitched piece face down. That way you're doing the pressing from the back, and the wool mat or the towel sort of gives a cushion to the embroidery stitches, and that way you're not smushing any French knots or any other dimensional stitches. So give it a really good press. If you happen to have a longer piece where you used basting stitches, you want to remove those as well. This particular piece is the only one that I worked on where I did not line it with any fabric, just in case you're wondering. But yeah, just, another option, I have not done this, but some people recommend maybe using a steamer to get all of those wrinkles out. But there you have it. Nice, freshly pressed piece of embroidery. At this point, you have taken out your basting stitches, you have pressed your stitched panel, and you want to decide what to do with it now. So first I'm going to go over some options if you're just working with one of the circles. And then I will touch on some ideas if you have a longer piece, whether it's 2, 3, 4 circles. So the easiest thing to do if you're just working with a square is you can leave it in the hoop if you have a hoop big enough to encompass the design. And with the design being circular, that makes it easy. I know if you ordered the kit, the hoop that came with the kit was smaller than the actual design. If you wanted to do that, what you could do, you've pressed it and you've removed all the marks from the embroidery hoop, then you can place it back into an embroidery hoop large enough to showcase the whole design and put it in a stand and hang it on a wall. But then there are also some places that sell really nice frames and it just gives it a more professional finish. Modern Hoopla is the company that I recommend, and I have some of her hoops in my shop, or you can just go directly to her website. So that is the easiest option. If you want to frame your stitched design, but you don't want to leave it in the hoop, you want to do something else, you can have it professionally framed, or you can frame it yourself. That is what I did with, here, I have it with me. That is what I did with last summer's panel. You can see it's much bigger. So that's an option. Another option is turning your stitch panel into a pillow. But I did that last year as well. And I will link to a tutorial for doing an envelope closure pillow. I find that the easiest way to do pillows because there are no zippers involved. And the tutorial that I will link to is one that I've used quite a few times. It's by Amanda Jean of Crazy Mom Quilts. Her tutorial is based, I believe, on like a 20-inch pillow, but she includes directions on how to take whatever size you're working with and do the same thing with any size. So that's an option for working, not only for just if you're working with one square, but if you have your panel that's longer where you're working on the panel with 2, 3, or 4 of the circles, you can do the same thing. I think it would look really nice, as I call them like the lumbar pillows, I think doing it like that would also be a really nice idea. So I will link to that in the description below. And then there's so many things that you can do if you take your finished piece and either piece it into something else, meaning, you want to make a larger tote bag than what, we're working with, like an 11, 12-inch square. If you have a favorite pattern for a tote bag or anything else, I'm just using tote bag as an example, you can just incorporate that into the instructions. So if it says to cut, your top piece 18 inches, all you do is just, add around your stitched panel to make it the size that you want for whatever patchwork project that you want to make. Or what you can do is you can stitch your panel onto something else. And again, whether it's something that you make that you're going to make a tote bag, but you want to applique or stitch your panel directly onto whatever design you have in mind. So say, for instance, you had quilted up some fabric and you wanted to make a quilted tote bag, but you didn't really want to quilt your your embroidery, and you just want to stitch that on top. So that opens up a whole lot of possibilities as well. And then you can decide whether you want to keep it in the square size, or if you want to cut around and make it a circle, keeping that circle shape. So I did make a few things where I appliqued onto ready-made items. I took one of my panels and decided to keep it in a square shape. So what I did, I don't think I have a video of this. I do have some videos to show you as well. But what I did is I just folded over the top and the bottom just a 1/4 inch and pressed it to the back. the hot iron, and then I did the two sides. And then I pinned it onto a tote bag that I already had. That's just a plain canvas tote bag that you can get anywhere. And then I stitched that square onto my tote bag. And the tote bag was pretty thick. So I opted to use my sewing machine to do that. Oh, I found a really quick video. It's not very long. It just shows me sewing the panel onto the canvas tote bag, and then there's a quick picture of the tote bag. However, there were a few times where I had to really finagle the tote bag around the sewing machine, when I got towards the bottom. But that is what I did here. I would have preferred something that was a little bit closer in color to my fabric. But this was all I had with me. That is the one thing about being away from your sewing room is you may not have all your supplies with you. So this is the tote bag that I had, and I just machine stitched on to the tote bag. And I use the term stitch. You can hand stitch it. You can, which basically would be like applique. You can applique it on. You can do it with the machine. You could also stitch it on with decorative stitches, either on your machine or by hand. And you could also do it in some really fun colors if you wanted to. The examples that I'm showing in this video are by no means exhaustive. There are so many things that you can do with your embroidered piece. And even if all I were to show you was one example, which I'm not, but even if I were to just show you one thing, there's so many different ways you could do that one thing. You can make it your own. You can just keep it simple, or you could go all out and just keep stitching and stitching and stitching. And that's one of the issues that I've had with my own is I just don't know when to stop. I think I'm done. And then I'm like, oh no, I can add some more stitching here, or add some more stitching there. So sometimes it's difficult to know when to stop embroidering. It's not a bad problem to have. So I'm going to show a video clip where I had taken another one of the squares, and I trimmed it down into a circle. I wanted to keep that circle shape. And then I had a denim jumpsuit that's been in my closet. I bought it last summer thinking, oh, it'll be fun to just do some embroidery on the pockets. And I never got around to doing anything with it. And I thought, oh, that might be a fun thing to do, is just applique the panel onto the back of this denim jumpsuit. The first thing I needed to do was to trace a circle at least 1/4 inch outside of the design. So I just took a dinner plate that I had. I think if you had a compass or something else, that would work as well. But yeah, I traced it around with a friction pen. Even though I was planning on cutting on the line, I wanted something that I would be able to erase with heat if I needed to. And then the next thing I did before this picture indicates, I folded under around all the way around the circle. I folded under 1/4 inch. I did not clip any of my curves. I think the circle is big enough, and it's not a tight circle. So I did not find any issue in the fact that I didn't clip any of my curves. But that was just me. So it was a little tedious folding under, all the way around, making sure that it's remained in a circle. So after I did that, and I pressed it obviously again really well, I placed it on the back of the denim jacket, and then I pinned it. And again, because I was going to be sewing over or sewing onto something that was pretty thick, the denim, I opted to use the sewing machine. Now, one thing that I did do is because I'm not really sure this this particular jumpsuit, it's not really something I would typically wear. So when I sewed it on to the back, I lengthened my stitch length on the sewing machine. That way, if I decide to remove it in the future, I can just, it'll be easier to use my seam ripper and just, take out those stitches. You can take the same idea that I used with the jumpsuit and apply it to any garment that you would like. It could go on a skirt. It could go on the back of a jean jacket, a denim shirt, a white shirt, a sweatshirt, anything, whether it's ready-made. I like to repurpose things. So, whether it's something that you got at the thrift shop and maybe it has a stain on it, you want to cover it up, or you're a very good garment maker. You could just incorporate it into a project that you had in mind. You can make your own skirt or dress or shirt or pants and plan to have the embroidered panel part of that. As a matter of fact, what I might do with one of my panels, because I started working on a lot more than just the four, our Quilt Guild is going to be doing a quilted coat workshop coming up. Now, it's coming up really, really soon, so I may not have time to do this, but I thought I might even save one of the panels and somehow incorporate it into the coat jacket that I'm going to be making in the workshop that I'm not teaching, I'm taking. But so that's another thing to keep in mind. So I don't have a video of this, and I didn't include a picture in the slideshow, but I had a friend who took one of my embroidery patterns. It's a peace sign, and she had stitched it onto denim Essex linen and found the same fabric and made a jacket for her granddaughter. And it's just so cute and super amazing. And I wish I had thought to include that in this video, but I didn't. Speaking of the peace sign, I know this is not what we worked on this summer, but I happen to have this with me. So this is something that I had embroidered several years ago and made it into a laptop case. I like to recycle, repurpose things. So these are just old jeans that I had. You can see the back pocket, and I love peace signs. So peace sign pocket with the peace sign design. But you could do the same thing with the embroidery panel that we did this summer. You can incorporate it into a laptop case, iPad case. So it is hard to tell because it looks like it's just one piece that I stitched on, but it's not. It's I stitched it on a piece of denim, and then I pieced it into other denim to get it big enough to make what I wanted to make. So that was what I was trying to explain earlier. If there's a pattern of something that you want to make and it's bigger than the fabric panel that you stitched, then you just, you piece it into other fabric and then make what you would like to make. So another project that I like to make with my hand stitched items is this modern Japanese rice pouch. It is a pattern by Karen Stevens. She's awesome. I took a workshop with her years ago at a place called Squam, and I met her there. And anyway, I've made quite a few of these, but the pattern lends itself to personalizing it, customizing it, adding stitches, patchwork. You can make it with just one solid piece of fabric, but it's fun to do it sort of in a patchwork fashion and add extra stitching and embellishments and all that. I've made a few, and I think incorporating one of the circle designs into the bag, I think would be brilliant. And of course, you would have to add more fabric on the sides and maybe even top and bottom. The pattern gives you tips and tricks on things like that. You could then add even more stitching elsewhere on the bag to sort of tie it into what you've already stitched. I look forward to doing that when I get home. So here's an old video that I took. So the proportions, the ratio is not correct for YouTube. But it just gives you an idea of how you can incorporate embroidery with other pieces of fabric and then add some more stitching to just, personalize it and embellish what you've already done. So where I've stitched that love, 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 it gives you an idea of what it would look like if instead of that you put the stitched panel in there and then added some other fabrics around it, whether it's colored print fabric to match the stitching colors or an off-white, low volume type fabric. There's so many different ways you can embellish these bags, which is really what makes them so much fun. So this is just, like I said, this is just one example. I've taken my pattern, the Whimsical Wildflowers or Wildflower Whimsy, I forget the name of it, and I turned that into one of these bags as well. So yeah, just another idea. For those of you that are working with more than just one of the circles in one continuous piece, you can still use some of the ideas that I've already mentioned. Maybe not, you may not be able to do a laptop case with 4, but if you had 2, you could, probably do that. And same thing with like a tote bag or the rice bag, or clothing. Again, depending, you can use your imagination and come up with all kinds of ideas. My original thought with the 4 in one panel was to make a table runner. And I did make a table runner, but I made a table runner because I wanted to show you how I did it and the measurements. However, I did not use my stitch panel for the table runner. And the reason why is when we got to Montana earlier in the summer, within maybe a week, we had some friends over. And it wasn't the table runner that I was stitching on, thank goodness, but I had a cream colored table runner on the table. And even though we had placemats and napkins and all that, I forgot what we were eating, but there was like a red stain. It wasn't my friends, it was my husband who spilled something on the table runner. And so I thought, I'm not really sure that I want to put all that work into doing all this embroidery just to have it on my table. That's just me, and that's just my family. You can still make it into a table runner, maybe only bring it out on nice occasions, or maybe don't put it on your dining room table or, your kitchen table where you eat a lot. Maybe you put it somewhere else. But so I did a little video clip that I'll show you in a second of the table runner on my table. Here in Montana, mainly because it was at night and you could see the mountains outside and you could tell I'm already missing it and I haven't left yet. But so here it is. And it's not quilted yet because mainly it's not quilted because I don't have any batting here. I thought I did, and I went to do some quilting the other day and I didn't have enough for this. But what I use, you can use whatever fabric you want to on the borders. I had some of this Alison Glass SunPrint, and I think I might even have some in the shop left. It's not an exact match. This is a 2024 print, and if you look closely, you can see it's not an exact match, but it's very similar. The design is not quite the same scale as the background, but I thought it was close enough. With the panel being with the fabric, it kind of makes the math and the cutting instructions pretty easy. So what I did is I cut 3 5-inch strips with the fabric. And of course, I trimmed off the selvages on my panel and the selvages on the background fabric. I took 2 of the 5-inch strips and I sewed one on one side and one on the other side, the long side, obviously right sides together, press those out. Then with the third strip, if you done everything correctly, and of course, measure and check, everyone has a different seam allowance. That third 5-inch strip that's with the fabric, if you, again, measure, but if you cut it in half, it should be the right size for the top and the bottom to add. and then press it, trim it, and baste it, quilt it, bind it, and you have a really nice table runner. So before I trimmed off my selvages on either end of the panel, I wanted to make sure I had at least a 1/4 inch space between the edge of the design and where I was cutting. With this particular panel, the designs are very close to the edges, so that is one tip that I have for you. You can see here I am pinning the 5-inch width of fabric strip on top of, or to the right of my fabric panel. I pin the top, pin the bottom, pin the middle, and then work my way in between. And I'm just sewing now the one strip. I'm doing this one-handed and trying to film, so apologize for that. But yeah, the rest of the steps are pretty easy. You're just going to sew one of the 5-inch width of fabric strips to the right hand side of the panel, like I'm doing here. Then you're going to sew one to the opposite side of the panel. Press those both open. Then you're going to take that third 5-inch width of fabric strip, cut that in half so you have at least 2 that are 21 inches long, and you'll sew one to the top, one to the bottom. Press those open, press really well, and trim up the edges. And here's the video that I promised where I had placed it on the table, just to kind of give you an idea of what it looks like all spread out. I wanted to point out quickly, though, that when I was recording the previous videos of the strips, pinning the strips and sewing the strips, in case you noticed, the strips are a little bit wider than 5 inches. I ended up originally making them 6 inches and then realized the math didn't work out quite as well as far as having that third strip work across the top. So anyway, if you wondered about that, I just wanted to point that out real quick. You can also pretty much do the same thing if you wanted to make it into like a coverlet at the bottom, the base of your bed. You could do that. Again, depending on the size of your mattress and how much overhang you want, but you could add extra fabric and make it as long as you would like. You could even make it into a quilt if you want. It could have a whole lot of negative space, or you could do more patchwork in there. There's so many ideas for taking your stitched panel or any embroidered fabric for that matter and incorporating it into other things besides just having your stitched fabric, which there is nothing wrong with just framing everything that you stitch or leaving it as is. I personally, I love hand embroidery, and I don't worry so much about, what I'm going to do with it afterwards. You have a lot of people asking, so, well, I don't know if you do, but I have a lot of people ask me, oh, what are you going to do with that? Or I would love to take up hand embroidery, but I don't know what I would do with all the things that I embroider. I'm a minimalist and I don't want to have a lot of things around my house. Well, gifting is always a really nice option. But I just enjoy the actual stitching process. So I don't worry so much about what I'm going to do with it, but I know a lot of people do. And of course, you don't want it to, you want to display it and let people see it. So I get the whole trying to figure out what to do with what you've embroidered. So I hope that these ideas that I've shown you kickstart your creativity, give you some ideas of what to do. It's just a start. Like I said, I've only touched on just a few options. There are so many more. And if you have some ideas that I did not include, please share them in the comments because I know other people probably would love to know about them as well. So that wraps up our 2025 Summer Embroidery Stitch Along. 12 weeks, 12 weeks of videos, but I think we did more like 14, 15 weeks from beginning to end. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate you joining me each week. I'm going to miss it. I'm going to miss you, but I'm going to keep doing my hand embroidery. I'll be back with other videos, not just hand embroidery. I like to share my other hand projects like English paper piecing and hand piecing and even machine patchwork, all types of things. So I hope you stick around for that as well. But again, thank you so much for participating in this summer's stitch along. The videos will stay up. You'll be able to go to the playlist and find whichever week that you're looking for on a particular stitch. Remember, I have the long, what I call the long version, and then the short version. But both of those playlists will stay up. And then also even last summer's 2024 playlist is still up. Now, last year I didn't do two different versions. So there's all my videos have a lot of talking, but those are also up. Please give me a thumbs up if you liked the video, subscribe if you haven't already. And I would love to hear what you think about it or suggestions for future sew-alongs. So leave me a comment or email me, and I will see you soon. In the meantime, happy stitching.